Hey, uh, I've heard that this topic of rupture and repair is a topic you're really interested in. So my son was late getting out of school, and so before I drove him home, I took some notes on my thoughts about this. I thought I'd share them. I will go through all the most recent theory and research about this before class on Monday, and so I'm more up to speed on things like that. But I just wanted to share my off the cuff thoughts that may or may not be helpful. So I guess one of the questions is I'll start here, right? Us as group leaders, right? What's our own ideas of relationship? What's been the model of ruptures? What's been the model of repair? How have we tried to become aware of this through being a group member or our own treatment or intimate relationships? And how have we worked through these in some way? Right? This would be what do we have some culturally influenced idea about rupture and repair, right? Is it, I think of the impact of Hollywood sometimes about seems very superficial sometimes. So, in terms of group, and I guess in terms of group leadership, I wonder if there even is a relationship to be ruptured, right? So, what is a relationship? Relationship would be people, I think, eventually explicitly agree on what the tasks are in the relationship, what the roles, what's the commitments are, and they find an agreement with this in some way. This morning, while my son was late for school after Halloween or late getting up, we got him to school on time. I shared with my wife my experiences of being a 17-year-old and how my mom handled it when I had a hard time waking up in the morning. It was a very, very vulnerable story. And my wife said, dance therapist, psychoanalyst, psychologist, clinical social worker. There's no doubt that, and she focuses so much on habitual patterns and the neuroscience of habitual patterns in her work. So, no doubt, everything I was saying, she was recording. She'll continue to think about it. She'll see my patterns. She'll see my transferences. She'll see my enactments. But we have built a relationship of trust that I trust sharing all this with her, and whatever conceptualization she'll put together about this, she's not going to tell me, but that will inform her how to be in relationship with me and have us be in relationship in a positive way. So this would be an example of a really kind of deep, trusting relationship where we have explicit agreements about how we'll be with each other. And when that goes awry, then we got to talk about it. Then that's a rupture in some way. But I thought of this story. I was doing this group at a conference, right? They get invited to lead this group, and I'm doing kind of this real free association, psychoanalytic group style. And one member comes in and is there, and I say, well, we're going to speak really freely. We'll see where our unconscious goes as a group, as individuals. We'll spend time doing this, and then we'll kind of reflect and see what meaning we can make out of it for ourselves, for our culture. And there was a very established, much more established and notorious group writer, theorist there who said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to, talk about your theory, Francis, and why you have your theory. And I've read your work and I disagree with it. And that's what I want to do. And we talked about it. Why do you want to do that? And I said, do you know what you're signing up for? Yeah, but this is what I want. And, we didn't have a relationship. I knew him in passing, but we didn't have a relationship built on shared vulnerability, shared honesty, commitment to depth of understanding each other and interacting with each other with as much care and awareness that we could possibly bring. He wanted something different than I wanted. And I eventually asked him to leave the group. And it was a real big hubbub. How could I do this? But we didn't, and then, he said, it's a big rupture, blah, 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 but we didn't have a relationship, right? My tasks, my views of how we would spend time together were very different than his, and there was no meeting in the middle. So I think of like rupture only comes out when you truly have a relationship. And then this is all personally and culturally based. What is your view of relationship, right? I think of many as if relationships I have with colleagues or people in the community. Uh, we get along well, we have similar topics, but I don't see this as like a deep relationship built on explicitly stating what we would like from one another, and then agreeing on that, and agreeing how we would be together, and even agreeing on how we would be in conflict together. So this is in contrast to my wife, where there is a deep relationship that could get ruptured, right? So I think when you're leading groups, there's an agreement between all members. And I'll get into this, I think, later, that what these relationships will be and what these, won't be. I think I did try with this, both with my wife all the time, to attune to say, like, thank you for listening. And I don't know if I said, I know you're giving it thought, and I know you'll take care of my heart with everything I've shared over 33 years. And of course, we've had ruptures and stuff like that. And with this other person, I said, I was honest. I really respect you. I respect your work. I made an agreement with the organization and the other group members that this will be the relationship we have for these 2 days. So he ended up leaving, and I don't know if this is a appropriate time, but I remember later in the group, it just got some moments of real wildness where everyone just kind of shared, like, I'd like to screw you, and I want to kill you, and marry your husband, and then have your kids be my kids, and I want to wrestle with you till exhaustion, and then cuddle in compliance. Is really primitive free association, which that group had the majority in the agreement to handle in some way. So, I mean, this comes up so often, say, in my earlier life of leading groups, say, with chronically mentally ill, where the flexibility in the agreements would have to be very, very wide for people to tolerate the intensity of the group. And as a leader, I had to be very big and large and bendy, because I thought that would be what was most helpful and that was authentic to myself. When the later example, I wasn't willing to be as bendy. We didn't have a meeting of minds of our agreement of our commitments to what we would do in relationship with one another. And of course, this comes up with, say, the violent perpetrators I worked with, that some people, I expressed what I wanted, they expressed what they wanted, how I felt the change process worked. And 99% of the time, we were able to find some kind of agreement on this and my role and their role, and sometimes not. And then if I could, I would move those people out of it in some way. I guess I have one more story. This happened recently. I'm leading a group. I have a new member, similar situation to today, that something came up in the family, and I was 5 minutes late for group. They had been in group for a little bit of time, like a few months. And I got there late, and they said, I need to be with a group leader who will always be on time. Will you promise me you will always be on time from this point forward? And I said, no, I can't promise you that, because I can't promise that, right? Family first for me. And if there's an emergency, my clients will have to come second, right? It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And they said, well, I need that. I can't be in a group without that. And it was getting a little dominating and a little black and white thinking. And my thought at the time was some enactment that they were playing out a parent role, and I was feeling like a child of the rigidness of their parents. And I had a bunch of interventions to say. And this person did this, I decided to push back at that time. I said, since I can't promise you that, and you're saying that's a necessity, should I give you some referrals to other people I know who are really good group leaders who are almost definitely will be on time for every group all the time? And they said, no, I'm attached to these other people and I want to be with, I want to be with the same group. And then I said, uh, well, I'm not against the group firing me and finding a new leader that would meet everyone's varied needs in some way. Very provocative. You do this out of an understanding of this client and this enactment and that's childhood things, and that stirred things up for sure. And actually, it was good, and people started talking about their attachments, and they wanted this other member to stay. And at one point, if you read the literature, I think I validated and said something like, or you mentalize for the client or interpret that. I really understand why that's important with your father, a single child of an alcoholic father, that predictability, particularly from men and older men, is really, really significant in some way. And I can imagine it does hurt trust and stirs up a lot. And I felt like I know they felt like I understood their experience. But, and then we also talked about how prior to that, I kind of played the other role that different than their father or other people in their life who would either just try to acquiesce to their needs blindly, even though they couldn't, or would explode and yell at them and threaten them or avoid. My two classic rupture and repair dynamics would either lean into the conflict and be physically abusive in this case, or would avoid in some case, which was neither satisfying. So I don't know if that was some form of curative therapeutic relationship I had with them. So, when you read about rupture and repair in group, what often comes up is people's attachment style. We read Sherry Morimish, who's an expert in both attachment style and rupture and repair and group psychotherapy. And you're kind of seeing people's tendency to avoid, to be really, really needy, how these tendencies might show up in their behavior and their relational patterns in some way, right? And then I'm thinking with this client actually had a very anxious attachment style on this bandit, but also very narrow relational flexibility for how people could be with them, which was continual reassurance. And as you work with your clients, or as I work with my group members, it gets a little more uncomfortable over time. And we're trying to find that edge of tolerance, that bandwidth in some way. So for people who have a very rigid attachment relational style, say just completely avoidant, you try your best to get them engaged, but they may not be able to get engaged. And then I think of people who have a very dysregulated sense of other people or objects and relational patterns, and it can go from complete avoidance and dismissiveness to neediness and affection, and that can be unforeseen ruptures in those relationships. And I'm here to help people understand and see their habitual patterns in relationships, and can stick with this, but also stick with it with boundaries. Like, here's my agreement. Like, like I said this the other day, you can't call me a beady-eyed Jew. You can't do that and stay in my group. That's an agreement for our relationship. This is what I expect from you. I want to hear what you expect from me. So for there to be a rupture, there needs to be a real relationship in some way. So what do we do, right? So if any of us have been in relationships, long-term relationships, we will experience rupture. I imagine every day I have one with my wife and my son to some degree, right? We disagree, we're not attuned, we're stressed, we're busy, we're distracted, right? Somebody feels not connected to in some way across the spectrum of minor to more more larger degrees of rupture that can happen. So what does the research say, right? Or this is my understanding off the top of my head of the research, right? So I think I covered some of it. So ruptures come up between two group members, and can they tolerate it? Is it in their window of tolerance to be in some kind of discord with the other person, or are they demanding repair immediately? Which I think I said something like this, right? Which is this combination of attunement and validation and reality. Makes me think of, the reality principles. Something, I think I said something like, I understand that you do not like Tom, and I understand that because I can't work this out between you and Tom and have Tom be the way or say the things you would like him to say, there's a lot of friction between us right now too. Am I understanding it? So really trying to attune to what's really happening, right? With court-ordered groups, like, hey, I understand you wish you never had to see me. Makes sense to me. So attunement is just two things, I guess. One is you're stating the client's feeling back, and the other is in some way you can mirror the client's feeling back. Although my wife has mellowed out, I had seen her take the body posture of, say, a dismissive or angry or resistant subgroup. In group, eventually they ask why, and then she narrates what, as she understands it, the expressions of that subgroup, which is something we can do, the unspoken subgroup narrative, right? We can do that as members. So there's a rupture between two group members. What do you do as a leader? I think you can validate both parties. I like to go for having both parties be validated by another group member, even mentalized with some depth of how they understand the experience. Even if they disagree with, at least understand it in some way, right? So this gives them sustenance to stay in the group, that they're feeling understood enough. If no member will do it, I will do my best to do that. I prefer it to come from other members in some way. So this would be validating, taking your time, working it through. Often there's a spark of something, and then next week people see each other in more complexity and nuance than what is happening in the limbic system at those moments. The second one is between members, you would renegotiate the agreements or the roles that they'll play with one another, right? What are you, I take a lot of heat. I put myself out front all the time. As a group leader, I'm somewhat well insulated, and but I would, I might say, like, oh, my understanding of the agreement here is that people try to speak honestly their thoughts and feelings, reactions to one another without being abusive. Is this a fair agreement? I have no agreement in my groups that people need to like each other, even respect each other. You just can't be abusive to one another. You just can't call each other's names and be passive aggressive and mock them. What can you renegotiate between two members to have them stay in the group? Like, I would like you, I've had wacky stuff, like even with me as a leader. Francis, I don't want you to talk to me, right? We had to renegotiate our alliance, and then I, would talk around it, and it got really absurd after a while, and we resolved it. As often happens, I said something that I thought was really affirming, like, it sounds like your sister can be very difficult to deal with. I was really trying to validate, and they took this as like a deep attack on their family, but they heard what I said more as like a deep attack on them. Because your relationship with your sister is so bad, you're really psychologically ill and you're hopeless, and I dislike you, and good people don't have conflicts with their siblings, and seemed almost like in a psychotic regressive realm, and I let that be and happen in some way. And then we renegotiated in the moment as the leader. Okay, I won't talk to you, but I'd like to know what you think. And they said something like, I'll think about it. And that was within my boundaries, within my agreements of what I could handle in that setting with that person. It's a long-term psychotherapy group. I'm willing to do more in those setting. It's my professional work than I am in, say, other settings where I expect uh, us to have more explicit and agreed upon and committed to and consistent agreement about behavior towards one another in some way. So, and then the group actually negotiated with this person how if they could talk to them or not, and people shared their thoughts that they didn't like this, and brought up a tremendous amount. All these examples, now that I reflect upon it, individuation possibilities that people saw me as a leader different, saw each other differently. With the member who refused to speak to me, other members were able to validate and mentalize that person's experience. And that was very helpful and helped them sustain and helped us have temporary agreements about how we would be with each other. And then we revisit these agreements. And this also happened between members that they were making requests of how they'd like to be each other. I hear about nonviolent communication, right? And what I like about it, it's really nice to have a nice model and nice structure about this, right? I can't help but think of it through my Lacanian lens that people have desire to express their desires and what they want. So that's really, really healthy sign, even if you don't get what you want in some way. And when something along these lines come up, I always bring up not always, sometimes bring up the reality that you won't get everything you want, but what would you need in some way to stay in the group, to stay in a relationship group. So, the last one is by far the most exciting, right? Is this what they would call in the literature, I think, exploratory resolution of a rupture and repair, right? So, subtypes we've talked about, the one who isolates and avoids, or the one that moves towards conflict in some way, or moves against. That's the language. It's from Karen Horney. You either move away or you move against, and you're trying to get people to move towards. But people will only, when they try to move towards, they have their own models of how they should do it. The other person has models of how they think the other person should do it. Sometimes I'm less flippant than I used to be, or provocative. And I remember saying something like, if you want to get along with Tom, my suggestion is both of you say everything that comes up, all your thoughts, maybe the historical roots, the cultural roots of this, memories that come up in some way, which I think would really help. It takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability. And if you're stuck in moving against or avoiding, that's not going to happen. So it takes a lot of maturity to move towards that. Not everybody has. And then we're working with one of these first two concepts, I guess. But I think as a group leader, you have a case conceptualization about all of your members that you hold loosely. So you see the conflict and you have guesses of how this is an enactment, how they're playing complementary roles with one another in group. Often this brings up to the leader sibling dynamics, who's they each have views about who's my favorite. And I think I usually say like something along the lines like, oh, this is the thing I like about you, and the thing I like about you, and this is the thing I dislike about you both. Usually some kind of repetitive, non-functional relational pattern that's been talked about in the group that often they've agreed with me that they need to work on in some way. So members wouldn't be in group if they could change so easily, right? There's a lot of obstacles. There's a lot of commitment, of loyalty, of doing things like your culture or like your family. It's part of your identity in some way. And even when you try to change, you still go back to old patterns over and over and over. in some way. I think it would be important to say, I'm thinking about, diversity wounds in groups, and I often go to relational context therapy, that these need to get addressed, uh, most likely uh, immediately. And it's hard because microaggressions are ambiguous. That's part of the damage, and that's part of the harm of them, because they're gaslighting in some way. But as a leader, can we very clearly say, that seems like a microaggression, or could we bring it to the group? Did anyone feel ouch in that in some way? Right. And then different models there for these types of ruptures, right? One you learned about from Aziza Belcher-Platt is uh, working with the person who was impacted the most, working with how the other members of the group saw it, trying to help the member who did potentially the microaggression be regulated, assuring them that you will get back to that, assuring them that you're committed to them having good relationships with others, and there's things to talk about, and that we will get to them, and eventually we will get to them. So I think to do this deepest level of personality, habitual pattern change, it takes a lot of vulnerability, a lot of openness, a lot of trust that develops over time, a lot of agreements about how people will be together in the group, and negotiated between the leader and the members, and also negotiated somewhat between the members. And uh, it's very risky to share with others what they may not be conscious of, and also to share how you think you became who you are, and why you're having the reactions that you are having, in a non-defensive but in a curious way. I talked about this other group. We all threw unconscious stuff all out, and then as a mature enough group that we could all explore its meaning, potential meanings, we could play, right? And sometimes in rupture and repair, there's no play. So I don't think you can force play or rush play. I mean, I like this model I just said: validate, attune, mentalize, renegotiate, and then explore in some way. Um, it takes, I have many examples that it takes two willing people, or willing group, to repair. And I can think of when I've had people who've had very different gender views about what gender is in group. And someone was repeatedly doing microaggressions, and I tried all these things to make it work, and they got really defensive. They got attacking back, super intellectualized, and the group was very upset with me, particularly the non-male, the non-binary and female members. And I tried to stick with it and work with this guy inside a group, outside a group. But it came to a point where I had to ask this person to leave. I had to protect the whole group, that there wasn't willingness or maturity uh, to be, or he didn't have enough forgiveness. He felt hurt, and he was a grudge holder, wasn't moving into the next present moment, relational moment with other people. And I had to ask that person to leave. And the group finally felt relieved, but they were mad at me that I worked so hard to keep this member in the group. They wanted me to kick him out immediately, but it also created more safety for that group, in that I would do the same for any of them. I wouldn't impulsively ask anyone to leave. I would work really hard to find ways to keep them in the group, to keep working with the ruptures that had happened in the group. Okay, I got to go. I got a group. Hope this is helpful to some degree. Okay, bye.